Hello there and welcome to our video lecture on perceptual mapping. As you can see here, the purpose of this lecture is to explain the concept of perceptual mapping and help you use this tool for your client project. Perceptual maps help us answer the question of what do your customers think of you, that is, your client, relative to their competition. The map's an important tool that illustrates competitive positioning. It's also known as a positioning map. Well, your client, with your help, has to decide upon a competitive position which will enable them to distinguish their offering from the offerings of other competitors, of other destinations for their customers' resources. So in the following slides, I will walk you through the process of creating a perceptual map. Again, make sure you take a look at the text and make sure you understand what we're talking about. Well, to start with, fundamentally, a perceptual map operates on two dimensions. So what we're going to do first is draw a 2x2 grid. We can put it right here as soon as I can get the hardware to work. There we go. It's going to be a vertical axis and a horizontal axis. You will draw it much more neatly than this. I'm still learning how to use the tools I've got in front of me. On each axis, of course, we've got extremes on the horizontal axis as well as on the vertical axis, and a 0 point in the middle. You can see I'm drawing it right there. What goes on these two axes, the vertical and the horizontal? Well, on both of them, you're going to put a range regarding the attributes that are important to your customers. Now, what does that mean? Well, I could probably explain it most easily by saying price and quality. So a lot of times you will create a perceptual map where price is one of the axes, from high price to low price, and then high quality to low quality. And then the question is, where does our client fit on the map? Are they a high price, high quality option, low price, low quality, somewhere in the middle? Well, as you can see, I sort of set up a straw man demonstration here because price is going to be a difficult attribute to use for our client because there's no money involved, and also because price and quality tend to be perceived to be very similar, and that is high price usually indicates high quality, low price usually indicates low quality, and that in effect gives you a one-dimensional map. Let me show you some actual examples. What we see here is an actual perceptual map that Steve Jobs, the late Steve Jobs from Apple, was presenting to his constituents. A map that depicts perceptions of smartphones and cell phones. Now, see the dimensions that they chose? They didn't choose price and quality. They chose, on the vertical axis, smart versus not so smart. And on the horizontal axis, hard to use versus easy to use. And then note how Apple perceives the marketplace to be. Smartphones and cell phones are not the same to them, and they're not the same to us anymore either. And the cell phones can basically be lumped into one category: cell phones. All the non-iPhones are more or less lumped into another category. So this is obviously a very biased perceptual map that Steve Jobs is sharing with his employees or stockholders or something. Obviously very biased. What do you think with your own phone use experience? Would you have drawn the map the same way? Now here's another perceptual map, this time of laptop computer brands. And you can see on the horizontal axis they used the price as an attribute from high to low. Here they didn't use quality as the vertical axis, but they used duration, which is actually similar in some ways, of course not always. And what they did is they plotted the competitors on this map. So whoever created this map perceives Apple to be of high price and highest battery duration, Sony to be a close second, Acer to be near the bottom in terms of low duration and short duration and low quality. Now, a couple of rules of thumb on perceptual maps. One is that when you're creating a perceptual map, I would like you to make sure that whatever attributes you choose at least 3 of the quadrants are populated. And in this case, all 4 happen to be. The reason for this is because if you're only populating, say, 2 of the quadrants, 1 and 2, or 1 and 4, what you essentially have is a one-dimensional map, and the other dimension isn't really important. As you can see, if we only focused on, say that the map was populated only by Apple, Sony, Toshiba, and Asus, well then you're actually ignoring the entire low price end of the spectrum. So you want to make sure that at least 3 of the quadrants are populated. In this case, even though all 4 of the quadrants are populated, even if it's just by one item, if you do the eyeball test on this, just take a look at it, you can see something I indicated at the beginning of this presentation. It is essentially a diagonal line, isn't it? Asus and Lenovo are kind of the outliers, but just about everybody else falls roughly on that line. Now, you might think, well, is that one-dimensional because it's not really one price or one duration? And yet it is. It just shows that price and duration, some combination of that, is one end of the spectrum. Maybe you're talking about quality. And the other end of the spectrum. Essentially, I think you're talking about battery duration, right? And when the price is higher, the duration is longer. When the price is lower, the duration is shorter. So you're going to want to do, so those are the 2 rules of thumb to keep in mind, is you want to populate at least 3 dimensions, and you want to make sure that whether it's vertical, horizontal, or diagonal, even if we rotate it a little bit, that you're looking at more than one dimension. Otherwise, you're just not getting as much value from the perceptual map as you could. Here's another perceptual map, and you've noticed that I'm showing you different examples from different industries laid out in different ways. That's because it can apply to so many different industries. This is really a marketing analysis tool I enjoy talking about and sharing with my students. So here we're talking about facial products, it looks like, right? Skincare products, cosmetics. And as you can see, all 4 dimensions are populated. You could also see that it does pass our eyeball test. You notice it's not only vertical, not only horizontal, not even diagonal. You have more of a sort of a curvilinear function going on here. And so multiple dimensions are used, and that makes this a more useful product because now you can start playing with your perceptual map in some different ways. For example, we see what these dimensions are, right? Vertically, it's from a premium product to a mass market product. Horizontally, 0% natural to 100% natural. And you could tell some aspects of the market. Say this is a snapshot in time of what the cosmetics market looks like. What does that mean? This certainly is a movement toward 100% natural products and away from 0% completely artificial products. There's also a movement toward mass market, but you can see that you're not going to see a lot of premium artificial products. In fact, let's take a look at that. You might notice that there is a pretty substantial, didn't mean to do that, hang on for a second, a pretty substantial blank space here. What does that mean? Sorry, Elizabeth. Continue to play with my new toys here. We didn't mean to include Elizabeth Arden in that blank space. What does it mean when there is a blank space on your perceptual map? There's a large one here that I sort of squiggled over. There's another one over here as we kind of get to the extreme. These blank spaces can mean a couple of things, and we'll continue to talk about that as you think about it. Why is there a big blank space by premium price, 0% market or 0% natural, and a smaller blank space by mass market and 0% natural? Well, as we're looking at that blank space, there are a couple of reasons that it might be blank. Well, the obvious one is that there aren't any competitors there. The question is why? Well, again, think about it. Do you think people would pay a premium price for a completely artificial product, especially when you look at what the rest of the marketplace looks like, the move toward natural products? And so it might simply be that customers have rejected previous occupants of this space. Maybe some manufacturers have tried to sell something that was 0% natural at a premium price and didn't sell any. They were rejected by the marketplace. They might have also discovered that it's simply not profitable to sell that product. Maybe because there aren't any customers, maybe for other economic reasons. It costs too much to manufacture. That may be better for a different industry. A third possibility, the first being that customers have rejected attempts, the second, that it's not profitable to operate in that space, and the third might be no one's figured out how yet. They just really haven't figured out how to make a product that appeals to a premium market with only artificial ingredients. You can say ask the same kind of questions and say the same sort of things about mass market and 0% natural. People just don't seem to want that product right now. Our next slide indicates how easy it is to create your own perceptual map for this aspect of your project. Really, all you have to do is, if you have access to some friends, roommates, customers, ask them to rate a product on a particular scale. So this example illustrates somebody was asking about fast food restaurants, and they asked people to rate on a 1 to 5 scale. How would you rate this restaurant in terms of freshness, or this restaurant's food in terms of freshness? And that, as you can see, is the vertical axis. To address the horizontal axis, they might have asked, how would you rate this on consistency of quality? And you don't even have to show the map to the people you're asking. Just ask them to rate on a 1 to 5 scale. Take the average responses, say that they asked 10 people, and the average score for McDonald's was roughly 3.5 in terms of freshness, roughly a little more than 2 in terms of consistency, which is surprising. McDonald's is usually the paragon of consistency in the fast food world. Alternately, you could give people a map and ask them to mark a spot. Where do they think it belongs? So there are a couple of different ways to get this information. For your project, you can certainly just talk amongst yourselves. What do you think? Can you, as a team, come to an agreement? Maybe the class can even work together, considering that we've got 30 people in the room. The issue here is that you're all working on the same project, and yet I'm guessing that you're not all going to have exactly the same dimensions for your respective perceptual maps. Let's look at another perceptual map, and as you can tell, since we've got a 12:30 class, lunch is always on my mind. So we're looking at some more fast food restaurants, looking at a couple of different dimensions right now. This time the vertical axis is expensive to low expensive or inexpensive, and the horizontal axis is high taste to moderate taste. Now in this case, I will admit I'm not sure what they mean by taste. Do they mean that it's particularly flavorful? Do they mean that it's for people of high taste? What do they mean? Well, that's something for you to keep in mind as you create your maps. Make sure that the attributes you're using are more clear than the ones in this example right now. Another interesting thing about this particular map that we're looking at is you'll notice in this case the horizontal axis does not go from high taste to low taste or bad taste or no taste. It only goes to moderate taste. And you can imagine, if I may draw a different vertical axis here, that maybe at one point they did have it go all the way to low taste. And of course moderate taste is in the middle. And maybe through their research, through their brainstorming, whatever they were working on, they realized that there's just not a lot on the negative side of taste. There's just empty space here. And so realizing my little rule here that we don't want to have only 2 of the dimensions occupied, we want at least, or of the quadrants, we want at least 3 occupied, they decided, well, if we just move that line over to moderate, which is now what we see here, what they actually did use. So they've got moderate at one extreme. Now the midpoint between expensive and low expensive is somewhere in the middle, and between high taste and moderate taste is somewhere in the middle. That's perfectly acceptable, because what they essentially did is they took a perceptual map and did a close-up. They zoomed in on it from including the bad taste side, which I've already sort of read it out there, to having moderate taste as one of the extremes. So does that make sense? They essentially took a two-dimensional map, zoomed in, and just focused on where, and moved the line, so now they have all four quadrants realized. You can also see that all four are occupied. It doesn't appear to be unidimensional. It passes our eyeball test. But something else that you should notice, as we've talked about before, is there are still plenty of blank spaces on this map. Now, you don't have to force the issue, and in fact, you're doing this a disservice if you think, maybe I should put KFC over here because it's empty there. And maybe this guy, whatever it is too high up. Now, don't bother doing that. You really need to put these where you think they belong on the map. But you still have to realize these blank spaces are very informative. They're telling you that there's not a lot of competition there. So what does that mean? When you see blank spaces like that, there are a variety of reasons. Sometimes, as we indicated from the cosmetics example, a blank space represents an undesirable black hole. It would be too expensive or too difficult to make something that tasted really good and didn't cost very much. It just wouldn't be very profitable, would it? Similarly, would you make something that's really expensive that doesn't taste that great? That's another problem. You probably realize that people have decided it's not worth how much you're charging. So how about the other two extremes? Moderate taste, not very expensive. You could tell it. We've got some population there. How about very expensive and high taste? We've got some population there too, but you also might realize that at this point, if you're going to make it really expensive and really good, you might be missing out on what your customers really need. You don't go to a fast food restaurant for a really expensive, really delicious meal. And so this might suggest, in addition to being an undesirable black hole, it also could simply be something that customers don't want. They're just not going to pay for it. But it might also represent something else, and that is an opportunity to differentiate your product. We'll talk about that in just a moment. Before we get to that, let's step away from the world of fast food for a minute and talk about colors. Here's a map that depicts perceptions of colors for an automobile manufacturer. Take a quick look at that, and you can see here we've got two dimensions. Vertically, it's elegant at the top to sporty at the bottom, and horizontally, it's classic and mature on the far left, and modern and fresh on the far right. If your target market responds to an elegant, mature kind of automobile, what color do you think you would choose for the exterior? See, elegant up here, and there we go, mature over here. In that dimension, we have two colors, blue steel and moss and white. If your marketplace demands a modern, sporty approach, here are some answers. Adrenaline, electro. And then we've got plenty in the middle. Platinum is for people that are sort of in the middle, maybe the more common mass market appeal. And so you can see that even using something like colors, you can create a perceptual map to understand how people perceive their choices. While we're on the topic of cars, here's another perceptual map. And in this case, we're using classy and affordable on the vertical axis, conservative to sporty on the horizontal axis. And what you could do, if I understood the technology better, is almost lay the previous slide with the colors on top of the slide we're looking at right now. You might have to rotate things a little bit, and you might be able to say what kind of colors people of a particular kind of car are most likely to enjoy. Again, this map meets a lot of my criteria, passes the eyeball test, right? It's not just one dimension, even if that's a diagonal. All four of the quadrants are populated. That's what I like as well. But in reality, perceptual maps aren't always laid out quite this neatly. So here's another approach to an automobile perceptual map. Here the dimensions are how prestigious is the automobile. That's the vertical axis from high, prestige to low. And the financial effectiveness. How financially effective is it from highly so to low financial effectiveness? Not crazy about that wording either. I'm not sure if they mean I'm not sure what they mean. But I also wanted to show you this map because this shows that even when all 4 quadrants are populated, just barely in the case of Audi, there's still a lot you can learn from this, a perceptual map like this. They're clustered together. They're not quite as neatly populated. So let's look right here where we see Audi and Ford and Toyota are all very close to each other on this perceptual map. This suggests that there's a competitive issue going on here, and that the people that were interviewed or surveyed or asked in order to create this perceptual map have very similar perceptions of Toyota and Ford and Audi. What can Toyota, Ford, and Audi do? Right now, again, according to this map, they're in a battle for the same customers or similar customers. Not a desirable position, unless you could say one of them had a dominant market share. They might be okay. Just so for the sake of conversation, say Toyota's got a dominant market share in the particular moderately prestigious, moderate financial effectiveness realm. This leaves Ford and Audi in a tricky situation here because if in this current situation Toyota is dominating, Ford and Audi are obviously not. So what they could do is reposition themselves. So perhaps Ford might decide they want to make themselves more prestigious. Audi might decide they want to make themselves more expensive. I'm guessing that's what it means by low. Actually, I got that wrong, didn't I? Just should take a look at the map there, Dave. The expensive cars seem to be on the high financial effectiveness side. Told you I didn't know what it means. So Audi might decide we're gonna make ourselves look more prestigious and more expensive. We're gonna try to go over here, maybe not quite so close to Honda, but maybe we're gonna try to make people think that we're a little more like BMW, but a little more affordable. Ford, well, they're probably not going to try to act more like Jaguar, are they? So maybe, stop shaking this. So maybe Ford instead will try to position themselves here. But this is called repositioning, when you try to create a different impression of what people think of your product. It comes through your marketing, it comes through your manipulation of the 4 Ps, and that's one way to deal with a competitive logjam like we see on this current slide. Here's another perceptual map. I clipped this out of the Chicago Tribune a couple of years ago. If you take a look at it, you'll see a lot of familiar names if you're a fan of comedy, as I am. Look at the dimensions. On the horizontal dimension, we're talking about traditional comedy to quirky comedy. And if you're a Zach Galifianakis fan, you know his interview Between the Shrubs, whatever he calls that, very unusual. If you look far to the left-hand side, Bill Cosby, Jeff Dunham, fairly traditional conservative approaches to comedy. You might not agree with how everything is laid out on here, but that's okay. And of course, on the vertical dimension, we have well established at the top to unknown at the bottom. Now, this particular graph is a couple of years old, so a couple folks on the unknown side, like Kevin Hart, Daniel Tosh, are actually much more well-known now. Greg Ferguson's got his own TV show. Louis C.K. probably isn't near the middle anymore. He's had a lot of success since this particular graph was created. So that shows that even though this particular graph is a snapshot, people move. The market changes, just like the repositioning I was telling you about. Now, there's something else important you should note about this map. This actually operates in 3 dimensions, not just 2. The size of the circle indicates that the perceived influence of that particular comedian on the stand-up comedy industry. So you'll see in the upper left-hand corner, Bill Cosby's circle is huge. Jerry Seinfeld, Chris Rock, Louis C.K., Zach Galifianakis are all very influential in their particular areas. Others less so, though again, things change. I would guess that Daniel Tosh has become more influential with his TV show, Kevin Hart, because he's had great success in the movies and TV. So these things have been changing, but this map has 3 dimensions. Your map, when you finish your assignment, should also have 3 dimensions. And one way you can get that third dimension is the size of the circle, the size of the dot that you use to indicate a particular spot on the perceptual map. Where would you put your favorite comedians? One of my favorite comedians who's not on this map is Steve Martin. And I would imagine you're at least familiar with Steve Martin's done a lot of TV, a lot of movies, and so if I were to draw Steve Martin on this map now, in the year that we're talking about here, I would probably put him on the traditional side, extremely known and extremely influential. So I'm going to get my little marker going here, and let's put Steve Martin. My marker's not working. Hang with me for just a second. Yeah, I keep making the same mistake over and over again, but I'm not getting any coloring. There we go. I'd put Steve Martin around here. Very influential. Maybe not as much as he was a few years ago, and very established. If you're not familiar with Steve Martin going back to your parents' era, going back to the 70s, you would find that he is not here, where I just drew him. He was probably around here. Extremely quirky and relatively unknown. And if you don't believe me, go look up on Google the next opportunity you have. Look up Steve Martin on Saturday Night Live. Look up Steve Martin doing his King Tut song. He was nuts, particularly for that era. The original arrow through his head stand-up comedian. And so what he's done is he has grown older. I don't know if this was a strategic decision. Who knows if it was something his agent recommended to him. But he has very deliberately moved from being dressed in a King Tut outfit or walking around juggling kittens in his early days to being an art expert on the Colbert Report. So you can absolutely move across the dimensions on a perceptual map, and that might be something you recommend for our client. All right, we've got one more perceptual map, and we're going to walk through an actual exercise so you can understand how the maps might work. This is hypothetical, but it's a real company called Carrefour, and they're one of the largest, if not the largest, grocery retailers in the world. You don't see them in the United States, but it's a French company, and you see them all over Europe, South America, and in this case, Central America. We are going to explore a perceptual map of Carrefour as they evaluate the grocery market in Mexico City. And so, in our case, Carrefour did some marketing research. They want to know what the landscape looks like in Mexico City. And so they surveyed a number of customers in terms of their perception of the local grocery store marketplace in terms of quality of the store and the prices, the general price structure of the store. Now, if you remember at the beginning of this presentation, I warned against using price and quality as your 2 dimensions because very often they're highly correlated, meaning you may end up with a 1-dimensional scale. Let's see what happened in Carrefour's case. Through their research, they plotted a number of their competitors. So as you can see, Sam's Club, Price Club de Mexico, Herrera, Comercial Mexicana, Walmart, Mega, Soriano Hypermart, Bodega Aurrera, and Bodega Comercial Mexicana are all listed on this perceptual map. And Carrefour also indicated how they want to be perceived on the map. They want to be perceived as high quality at a moderate to slightly on the low side price. And so they plotted out the points. This is what the landscape looks like. And so by looking at this map, you could see who Carrefour thinks their top competitors are going to be. There's one. There's one, a little more on the expensive side. Here's a cluster. And again, remember what I said before, eventually one of these stores might decide they want to reposition themselves unless they're the leader in that particular cluster. Now, here's another element that I want you to keep in mind that I'm going to ask you to include on your assignment. there is something called the ideal point. Think about target markets, and of course we've worked on this with our lectures on segmentation, targeting, and branding. And positioning, of course. We talked about this in developing the consumer persona that you worked on last week. But of the combinations of quality and price, there are going to be certain ideal points. And that is what a market segment wants from the marketplace. So, for example, why don't we draw an ideal point right around here? Call it a little star. This ideal point suggests that there is a cluster of consumers, a segment, that wants higher quality in their groceries, and they're willing to pay a little bit more. You can see where they lay on the perceptual map. There is another segment, and it wouldn't surprise you that it's really close to this cluster. They want good quality at a low price. And that's where a number of stores have congregated in order to meet that cluster's needs. In fact, I would bet that's probably one of the larger ones because of the stores that are all bunched there. And for the sake of argument, let's say there's a third ideal point right around here. These are customers that are willing, that want to pay, will only pay a very low price, and they're willing to accept lower quality in exchange for that. If these are indeed the ideal points for the Mexico City marketplace, you can make a couple of judgments here. One was the guess that this is the highest or the largest segment. Another is that there are some segments that are not being served very well, particularly these. There are a couple of merchants that are not serving any particular segment very well. Now, there might be some smaller groups of customers that keep these stores in business. Maybe not enough to merit a little 5-pointed star like I drew, but you can have smaller ideal points as well. It also suggests that these customers that I'm circling here in the high quality, high price realm, they could be served better. Because this store, they're leaving some money on the table, aren't they? There are customers willing to pay more for even a lower amount of quality that they're delivering. Similarly, with this store, the quality level is about where this ideal point, where this segment wants their quality to be, but they're willing to pay more. So that's another benefit from perceptual maps, is you can understand what your customers really want and how well you and your competitors are satisfying those needs. A couple other quick points about ideal points. As I indicated, there's not necessarily 3, but we'll talk about that with your assignment in a couple of minutes. And they don't also necessarily look like green stars on a PowerPoint slide. There are different ways to indicate that. I've also used smiley faces before, but the point is that you've got your merchants, your competitors, and you've also got your customers on the same map. How well do they match? There's something else on this map that we've talked about before, and that is those blank spaces. Let me see if I can figure out how to change colors on my pen here. I did it. Lots of blank space there. Lots of blank space there. There's even blank space here for your super premium grocery stores. There's some blank space here. There might be ideal points that I didn't plot on here where people want to pay even less and will accept even lower quality, where people expect even higher quality and are willing to pay more. Then again, you also have high quality at a low price. That might be one of those black holes we talked about where nobody's willing to manufacture high quality groceries when they're only getting a low price in return. Similarly, nobody wants to pay a high price for low quality. So right here, that's probably where the customers won't come. Here's where the manufacturers won't go. The blank spaces also, as I mentioned, mean that there's not a lot of competition. Again, that's because nobody wants to be there. It's not profitable to be there. Or, like I suggested here, there's an ideal point here, but that ideal point's in kind of a blank space. It's an opportunity that nobody is currently taking advantage of. Should Carrefour go there? Well, now we're talking about strategy. Now we're talking about policy. And Carrefour just think about would Jewel go to that space? Would Dominic's, the late lamented Dominic's grocery store, go to that space? No, because that's not who they are. that space is an opportunity, but it just might be an opportunity for somebody else. Remember that Venn diagram, right? If your grocery stores are here, there are some customers here that want to pay more, but that doesn't overlap where Dominic's or Jules' abilities lie. So for those stores, the space remains blank. That's where, who goes there? Are we talking about Whole Foods? Are we talking about Trader Joe's? The high quality and the high price. The crowded spaces, as I mentioned before, suggest there's a lot of competition. It could be something that a lot of people want. Again, Jewel and Dominic's survived for decades. When I was a kid, ask your parents too if they grew up in this area. We shopped at Jewel, we shopped at Dominic's, out in the suburbs anyway. There was enough business to sustain both of those merchants in a crowded space, though Jewel was obviously the market leader and they survived. It could be that the costs of competition make it difficult to move. And of course, and tastes change and environments change. Competitors pop up and they disappear. They serve certain niches. Here's a niche that somebody might decide to serve someday. And sometimes people's tastes change. What are the competitors on this map going to do? So this is a pretty good map. All the quadrants, 3 of the quadrants I should say, are populated. And that's something I'm looking for. But remember, you don't want those dimensions to be too similar. And again, price and quality tend to be highly correlated. So what you have to keep in mind is that if you rotate this map, like I'm doing here, you see that it really is more or less unidimensional. All the competitors pretty much line up on the same plane. So what does that mean? If you create a perceptual map and it ends up looking like it's unidimensional because I can rotate it and it looks like one line, that'll hurt your score on the project because that shows that you've created this map but you didn't get the most you could have gotten out of it. So take the time to make sure that they don't line up that way. And that way you can get more information from the map than you're getting. Well, let me share a couple of final thoughts here as you start to look over what your assignment for this particular workshop is going to be. As a doctoral student, I actually took an entire course on perceptual mapping and related topics called multidimensional scaling. You can add many, many dimensions, not just 2, not just 3, and you can rotate these things using a computer and end up with all kinds of crazy rotations and topographies. For our class, we're not going to do that. What we really want to know is what our client's competitive marketplace looks like and what the customers think of that. So the perceptual map, a very useful tool, so make the most of it in understanding our client's competitive environment. Don't settle for a map that's unidimensional or uninformative. So the assignment, worth up to 5 points. This will also come out of my little other assignments points bank. And more important, again, like for the consumer persona, this output is part of the remaining stages of your project. So what I want you to create, and this is due on Friday the 28th of February, is a perceptual map based on 3 variables that are important to your client's optimal target audience. Who's the optimal target audience? You made at least one of them last week. How do you indicate 3 variables? A vertical axis, a horizontal axis, and then the size of the circles or the markers you use to indicate each competitor. I would like an indication of your optimal target audience's ideal point. I would like to see placement of our client and at least 4 competitors on this perceptual map. Now suppose you've got 4 competitors in mind, you've got your dimensions in mind, you plot them, and you realize you're not populating all 4 of the dimensions. Choose different dimensions. If you plot them and you realize you've got more or less a straight line even though it's going diagonally, choose different dimensions, choose different attributes that will make your map more informative. So I'm really asking you for just the one ideal point. You can certainly plot more than one and that would be useful for you. And their corresponding ideal points. Again, at least 4 competitors. If you've got more in mind, then plot them. Make the map even stronger. I also want your team to write a brief summary of what our client can learn from the map that you've created. And you should submit this via Canvas by midnight, Friday, the 28th of February. As always, if you have any questions, I hope you'll let me know. Remember to look at your other class material on segmentation, targeting, positioning, and branding. Thanks a lot. We'll see you in the classroom.